Have you ever looked around and felt like everyone else knew how to make friends and date and grow up, and everyone's performing and playing the part they're supposed to play, but you just never got the memo? That's Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye. Before it was published in 1951, teenagers in literature usually learned valuable lessons and grew into better versions of themselves, but Holden doesn't do any of that. On the surface, the novel is about a 16-year-old wandering around New York City for a few days after getting expelled from school. But under that, it's really about trying to grow up and connect with people while simultaneously fearing growing up and pushing everyone away. Holden tells us his story in the first person. It's always his perspective, his voice, how he wants to tell it, and he admits he lies sometimes, which makes him an unreliable narrator. When the novel opens, Holden tells us that he was in a mental health facility, but he doesn't want to give us any details. Instead, he only wants to tell us about the few days leading up to winter break when everything kind of fell apart. He's been expelled from an expensive boarding school, again, because it's happened before, and he's failing almost every class. But the real problem is that Holden doesn't fit in anywhere. He wants to connect with people, but every time someone gets close, he pushes them away, or there's a misunderstanding. It's like he sabotages every chance he gets. Before leaving the prep school, Holden visits one of his favorite teachers, Mr. Spencer, who genuinely cares about him. But Holden sees Mr. Spencer's concerns about him being expelled as just criticism, like it's just another adult hounding him, so Holden mentally checks out. And this happens a lot. Adults try to reach him, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes sincerely, but Holden has already decided that adults are phonies or fake, which is the word that he uses most to describe people. At first, you think he's just cynical, but then you realize he's afraid of adulthood and the real world in general, because to him it's reduced to compromising, performing, saying things that you don't mean, and just generally being inauthentic. And he thinks he sees phoniness everywhere, whether people are actually being phony or not. In his dorm room, we meet two roommates. Ackley is annoying and socially oblivious, and he's always hanging around where he isn't wanted. Then there's Stradlater, who is handsome and athletic and confident. Stradlater is going on a date with a girl called Jane, who Holden dated a while back. And they don't talk anymore, but he still hangs on to the memory or the feeling of a real connection with someone. But when Holden dated Jane, they were a little younger, a little more innocent. They never even kissed. And Jane is a little older now. And Holden suspects that the dynamic with Stradlater might be a little different than it was with him. And here we see that tension of wanting to hold on to childhood and innocence, but also wanting more adult experiences like sex and dating. And this is an internal conflict that we see in every chapter. Holden desperately wants to be an adult. He wants to feel free, he's curious about sex, but every time adulthood becomes real, whether that's through relationships or with responsibilities, he pulls away. While Stradlater is out with Jane, Holden writes about his younger brother Ali's baseball glove, and this is the first time we see something that really matters to him. Ali was Holden's 11-year-old brother who died of leukemia several years earlier. And in many ways, Ali kind of becomes frozen in time, like innocent forever. And Holden clings to that memory of perfection and time standing still. This is a version of childhood that Holden idealizes. When Stradlater gets back from his date with Jane and refuses to tell Holden if anything physical happened, they get into a physical fight. Holden can't stand that Jane might have had a physical relationship with Stradlater. He wants her to stay young and innocent just like she was when they dated, because if she grows up and changes, then it's like he's supposed to grow up and change too, and he's not ready to let go of his childhood just yet. Stradlater is bigger, and he easily wins the fight, and since Holden's already been expelled anyway, he just leaves the school without telling his parents, and he just goes to wander around New York City. The moment that Holden gets on the train, he feels kind of free, but even though he's escaped school, he hasn't escaped himself. On the train, Holden sits next to the mother of one of his classmates, and she has no idea who he is, just that her son goes to the same school. And this part is interesting because Holden is always complaining that everyone else is fake, but when he talks to the mother, he gives her a fake name and starts telling her these huge lies about her son. And interestingly, it's all because he wants her to leave this conversation believing that her son is wonderful. Holden hates phoniness, but he's constantly pretending to be someone else himself. He criticizes people for wearing a mask, but he rarely takes off his own. He gets to his hotel and he's completely alone in this huge city. And from his hotel room, he starts watching people in the rooms across from him through the windows, and he sees adults in private moments living lives that he doesn't really understand. He's watching people living from afar, like he's on the outside looking in. What catches Holden's attention almost always has something to do with growing up, like the sexual scenarios that he's looking at through the windows. But while he's fascinated by these adult experiences, he also holds back at the same time. He decides to call a woman that some classmates at school were talking about, but when she suggests meeting the next day instead of immediately, Holden cancels. He goes downstairs to the hotel's nightclub, and he gets frustrated that they don't serve him alcohol and that the adult women are not responding to him, but he's like 16. And he starts thinking of Jane. Not because he misses her in particular as a person, it's just that she represents a connection of a simpler time, a more innocent time. Holden takes a taxi just to go for a ride, and he asks the cab driver one of the most important questions in the entire novel. Do you know where the ducks go when the lagoon in Central Park freezes over? And the cab driver doesn't know. He doesn't get an answer. But this question isn't about ducks. It's about growing up. If you think of the seasons as time, where spring and summer are youth or childhood and fall and winter are adulthood, you see what he's asking. So he's asking, what happens to the ducks when the world changes? Do they survive life changing, time moving on? And he asks this question several times in the novel to different adults, but he never gets an answer. Back at the hotel, the elevator operator notices that Holden is lonely and frustrated, and he offers to send a prostitute to Holden's room. And Holden wants this. He wants a sexual experience. But when Sunny, the prostitute, arrives, Holden immediately changes his mind, and he lies again, and he says that he just had back surgery and that he can't have sex right now, which earns him a punch in the face from her pimp. Many readers are surprised that Holden sabotages the very thing that he said that he wanted, but the truth is that what he wanted wasn't really sex, it was closeness. Holden keeps trying to talk to people, and eventually he hangs out with a girl from school called Sally, and he criticizes a lot of things about Sally, and he says that she's phony, but one thing about Holden is that he constantly insults the people whose attention he wants. It's like he's protecting himself. Like if he convinces himself that someone isn't worth liking, then it won't hurt when they reject him. But it hurts anyway. They go see a play on Broadway, and of course Holden is criticizing the actors and saying that the performances feel artificial. And after the play, Holden suddenly asks Sally to run away with him to a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Like right now, in the middle of the day. And it's not really a romantic thing because he's not in love with Sally or anything. He's just trying to run away from the world. And when she tells him that he's being impetuous and unreasonable, he loses his temper again. And when she leaves, Holden becomes even more isolated. He hangs out with an older student, Luce, who he knew from school but who's in college now. And Holden's excited, but just like before, he has a chance to get close to someone and have a real conversation, but he kills it. He starts making immature jokes about sex and sarcastic comments until Luce gets tired of it and leaves Holden drinking by himself. He's in an in-between stage where he's not a small child, but he's not an adult yet either. He wants to experience adulthood, but he's scared of it and he's really critical of adults as well. So he starts thinking about the ducks again and that question, can we survive growing up and the passage of time? Holden feels completely lost and alienated and sneaks into his parents' apartment to see his little sister Phoebe. And for the first time in the novel, Holden relaxes and puts down the sarcasm and the anger and is just himself. Phoebe's only 10, but she's Holden's closest relationship. She sees him for who he really is. When he complains about being expelled and says that he didn't like the school, she tells him, "You don't like anything." Holden finds something wrong with everything in the adult world, and he tells Phoebe about a daydream that he keeps having. He imagines children playing in a field of rye beside a cliff, completely unaware that the cliff is there, and his job is to stand near the edge to catch them before they fall. And this is based on a poem that he remembers reading. But Phoebe knows the poem too, and she tells him that he's quoting the poem wrong. The Catcher in the Rye doesn't exist. What Holden wants is impossible. He wants to stop children from growing up, to stop innocence from disappearing, to stop time itself, but it's impossible. Phoebe doesn't ridicule him, she just listens. It's the realest emotional connection Holden has had with another person in the whole novel, and it's no coincidence that it happens with a child. After spending time with Phoebe, Holden decides to visit one more person, his former teacher, Mr. Antolini. And Mr. Antolini listens to Holden talk about his problems with patience and with compassion. But he warns Holden that he's worried that he's going towards a terrible fall himself. He's worried that Holden is not okay and is pretty close to a real serious breakdown. And he tells Holden that he should keep learning and reading and that every generation has struggled with the same questions. So this mystery of growing up isn't new. It's not impossible. You just have to give it time. And it's one of the few genuinely hopeful conversations in the novel. This next scene has confused readers for decades because people bring their own fears and their own interpretations into the text. But we have to remember to look at the story for what actually happens on the page and treat the characters as the writer wrote them. Holden falls asleep on the couch, and he feels Mr. Antolini stroke his hair. And Holden freaks out. He assumes that there's something sexual in that, and he leaves. Now, in reality, it's never clear that that's Mr. Antolini's intention. He never touches him anywhere else. He never says anything inappropriate. But remember that we're seeing everything through Holden's perspective. And he thinks that every adult is phony, that the whole adult world is fake. He sees ill intent in any adult that tries to give him advice or tries to help him out. So it's not hard to see him reading something shady in an adult that's being kind and telling him that he has to kind of like change his ways and telling him that he has to kind of change the way he's thinking. Holden starts imagining a life where he never has to connect with anyone ever again. And he decides to leave New York without a plan, but he meets up with Phoebe at the museum just to say goodbye. And museums are sacred to Holden. Holden loves museum exhibits because they're a place where things are preserved. They're frozen in time. And this is Holden's crisis and the theme of all of his internal struggle. When Phoebe shows up, she's clearly worried about him. So much so that she shows up with a suitcase in hand, planning on coming with him wherever he's going. She also brings him his red hat, which is Holden's magical object. It's a symbol of his personal armor, kind of like Superman's cape. And he wears it in moments where he's going to take a chance or where he needs to feel confident. And Phoebe brings him this important object, and it's the first time that he's able to receive an act of kindness without assuming ill intent. When adults have tried to give him advice or care about him in the book, he immediately interprets their words and actions as being ill-intentioned, and he pushes them away for being fake, at least in his eyes. This is the first time that we're seeing someone being kind without him having to chase them, and it's easier for him to accept it and believe in it if it's coming from a child. This is also when we see real growth in Holden. He sees that his problems and his trying to run away are affecting his little sister, who's only 10. And he finally acts with real maturity, and he puts her well-being ahead of his own immediate wishes. He acts like an adult so someone else can remain a child. And even though he's deep into his alienation and this breakdown, he starts putting pieces together in his mind to take a step forward. He tells her she can't come with him, but he takes Phoebe to the Central Park carousel, and while he watches her, we see him at his happiest. He's watching a child he loves enjoy an innocent activity, literally going in circles without end. He wants to stay in this moment, where innocence is preserved, where time just goes in circles and never stops. But there's something in him that starts to understand that kids need to grow, that you have to let go a little. After that, Holden tells us that he went to a rest home or a clinic to recover from the breakdown, and that he's going to go to another school for next year. And like in the beginning, he doesn't want to give us any more details or explain a lot, but he's moving forward. It's not heroic, it's not a perfect, neat ending, but that's kind of the point. That maybe learning to mature is accepting that life is not always wrapped up in a neat package, doesn't always fit your worldview, and maybe taking a step forward is enough. Catcher in the Rye has remained popular for more than 70 years because most people have experienced what Holden is feeling. The fear that everyone else has life figured out and you don't. The feeling of being alone in a crowd, wanting connection and pushing people away at the same time, and wanting desperately to stop time and preserve a perfect moment. So, what did you think of Holden? Is there anything about his experiences that you could connect with? Let me know in the comments. I'd also love to know what other books you'd like to see in the channel. There are so many great books, it's so exciting. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time for the next great book.